At 6 a.m., the smell of coffee still lingered in the air when I stepped outside, and my Jeep was gone. Not stolen by some midnight car thief looking to flip it for parts. No, this was different. There was no shattered glass, no panic, just an eerie calm. And a deep, searing rage that rose in my throat as I scanned my quiet suburban driveway. Then I saw the note fluttering in the morning breeze, a paper taped to the gate like a ransom letter. Unauthorized vehicle modifications violate Section 12.3b, Vehicle Impounded Pending Compliance Review. Signed, Management. But it wasn't just management. Security footage told the truth. There she was, Dolores Crenshaw. 2 a.m. sharp, directing a tow truck like she was conducting an chai orchestra of suburban tyranny. Her blood-red nails glinting under the streetlights, a floral perfume cloud that probably suffocated everyone within 10 feet. And in her hands, bolt cutters. She'd cut through my lock, my chain, my rights. She had no idea what she'd just done, because she hadn't impounded a neighbor's lifted Jeep for an HOA violation. She'd stolen federal government property, surveillance-grade equipment, covert tracking tech, and she did it to a federal wildlife crimes investigator in active duty. Yeah, that's me, Marcus Steele. 34, special agent. Think poachers, smugglers, wildlife trafficking. I've followed men who sell endangered species across continents, and I do it in a Jeep that doesn't just look tough, it is tough. Reinforced bumpers, hidden antennas, and government GPS tracking that can ping a python from a helicopter, but in Pinewood Estates, Colorado. All that meant nothing to Dolores Crenshaw. You see, I moved here undercover. Standard op, subtle surveillance in a community that looked picture-perfect on paper. It was the kind of place where beige mailboxes and trimmed hedges meant more than human decency. Where HOA rules read like scriptures. Where violation notices appeared faster than Amazon packages. And Dolores? She wasn't just the HOA president. She was its self-crowned queen. She lived on the corner lot with the biggest lawn in the neighborhood. A mansion so sterile it looked like a model home. Her white BMW sparkled like a weapon. Her welcome basket was heavy with muffins and menace, and within a week, she was already writing me up. My crime? Aggressive tires. Apparently, all-terrain rubber offended her aesthetic vision. Week 3. She was asking about my late-night comings and goings. Why was I leaving at 4 a.m.? Why did my vehicle look military? The truth? I was working, chasing leads, building a federal case against a wildlife trafficking ring that had slipped under local radar. But Dolores didn't want explanations. She wanted obedience. And when I brought donuts to an HOA meeting to ease tensions, she looked at me like I'd personally insulted her interior decorator. That community center smelled like stale coffee and crushed dreams. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by Harold the accountant bobblehead, Nancy the confused yogi, and Pete the bored insurance guy. They nodded along with every word, she said like trained dogs. And then came the barbecue. She cornered me by the grill, leaned in too close, complimented my arms, my eyes, my mysterious schedule. It was flirty, then aggressive. I deflected, politely, firmly, professionally. That's when everything changed. Dolores studied my Jeep like it was a suspect. Her tone shifted. The smile disappeared. What had been passive-aggressive became just aggressive. I tried to brush it off, let it go. I was trained for worse. But her next move? Fabricated evidence, photos, doctored images, measuring tape staged to show my Jeep an inch over the property line. Except the line wasn't even mine. Then came the emergency meeting in her vanilla-scented living room where she unveiled a PowerPoint slideshow like she was revealing Watergate. Her voice echoed over photos so poorly edited it looked like a high school prank. The board voted 3-1 to fine me $200 a day, $200 a day. For what? For owning a government-issued vehicle designed to bust international criminals. They thought they were punishing a rebel neighbor. But they were poking a federal bear. Every action Dolores took, I documented. Every email, every manipulated photo, every fine, every word of slander. I didn't lash out. I didn't confront her, because I knew something she didn't. In my world, we don't fight petty wars. We build cases. I knew Dolores wasn't doing this out of concern for the community. She had an angle. I just had to find it. So I ran her background, standard op, and there it was. Hidden beneath her pearl-wearing, flower-baking image, she owned 30% of Rapid Recovery Towing through her brother-in-law, Danny. Every vehicle she had towed, she profited. Impound fees, storage charges, admin costs, all siphoned back to her through her little family side hustle. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was running an extortion racket in a pantsuit. That's when I stopped worrying about fines and started preparing for war. And Dolores? She had no idea what storm was coming, because the one thing federal agents never forget: documentation is a weapon, and I was armed to the teeth. What kind of person cuts a federal-grade lock at 2 a.m. and doesn't think twice? What kind of person points at a government vehicle equipped with encrypted radios, surveillance-grade GPS, and antennas tapped into 3 state networks and sees a nuisance? Someone drunk on HOA power. Someone like Dolores Crenshaw. The tow truck had barely cleared my driveway when I got the footage. Dolores, in her robe and pearls, directing her brother-in-law like a crime boss organizing a heist. She didn't even flinch as the bolt cutters snapped my chain. Federal chain, government issued. 10-year minimum sentence if anyone cared to read the statute. But she wasn't worried. Because she thought she ran Pinewood Estates. She didn't know she was messing with a task force. I stood there in my empty driveway, rage clenching in my chest like a vice. My Jeep, my mobile command post, was now sitting behind a chain link fence in an impound lot, the kind of place where motor oil and broken dreams mix in the air. And Dolores? She'd left a second note. Vehicle impounded. Compliance pending. She'd even signed it like she was a judge, except she wasn't a judge. She wasn't even legally protected. She had just stolen federal property. And her fingerprints were all over the crime. My instincts were screaming. This wasn't just one bad night or one bad vote. This was something bigger. Something orchestrated. So I called in backup. Lieutenant Rodriguez, 20-year federal veteran, walked into my apartment like the cavalry. He bench presses motorcycles for fun and speaks like every word weighs 100 pounds. He reviewed the footage. He didn't speak for 30 seconds. Then he looked at me and said, "She just walked into federal felony territory with a marching band." We started the file that night. Codename: Operation HOA Hellfire. Rodriguez looped in the federal legal team. I pulled my registration records, official vehicle authorization, issued by the Department of the Interior. We had documentation thicker than Dolores's rulebook. Every bolt on that Jeep was accounted for, federally approved, and legally protected. She had no jurisdiction, no authority, no clue. But what we needed wasn't just justice. It was irrefutable, televised, community-supported justice. Because Dolores didn't operate in silence. She broadcast. 3 days after the towing, she stood at the community center podium and clicked through a PowerPoint labeled Enforcing Community Standards. She was proud of what she'd done. Harold nodded like a toy bobblehead. Pete scrolled his phone. Nancy blinked at nothing. And Dolores? She smiled, but while she weaponized HOA bylaws, I weaponized evidence. I started running background checks, not just on Dolores, on the entire board. Financial records, towing logs, vendor contracts. And what I found? This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a scheme. Dolores had been targeting residents for months, and every time the vehicles she had towed ended up in her brother-in-law's lot. Rapid Recovery Towing. Her silent 30% stake turned every mite. Violation into profit. This wasn't community protection. It was organized extortion dressed up in floral perfume and fake patriotism. She'd built an empire on threats and fines, towing RVs, fining veterans, even harassing families for decorative flags. But it didn't stop at money. She wanted control. She'd launched a whisper campaign against me. Cryptic Facebook posts, side comments at HOA meetings, insinuations that I was bringing danger into the neighborhood. And worst of all, people believed her. Tom, a Vietnam vet down the street, got a $500 fine for marine vessel storage. It was his fishing boat, parked legally for 6 years. The Martinez family had their RV tagged for towing even though their parking permit was older than Dolores's divorce decree. Anyone who questioned her got a violation. Anyone who ignored her got a threat. And anyone who defied her got crushed. But I wasn't just defying her. I was building a federal case, brick by brick, document by document, witness by witness. And then came Janet Kowalski. She knocked on my door at 7:30 p.m., nervous, holding a stack of papers like they were classified documents. She was a forensic accountant, lived 3 doors down, harassed for planting pink roses, fined $300 for non-compliant landscaping. She'd had enough. Janet had started combing through the HOA's financial records, using her old auditing software. And what she found? It made my stomach drop. $47,000 missing from HOA reserves, duplicate vendor payments, emergency landscaping, bills filed during snowstorms, security consultations that had no record of anyone showing up, and routing numbers that led directly to accounts in Dolores's name. This wasn't petty theft. This was felony-level embezzlement. I looped in Rodriguez again. He called it. This isn't HOA drama. This is federal fraud. We keep digging. And so we did. Every illegal fine, every forged violation, every vendor invoice signed by Dolores Crenshaw, HOA president, we documented it. But the more we uncovered, the more dangerous she became. She hired a private investigator, Rick Sampson, ex-mall cop energy, drenched in cologne. He followed me like a lost puppy with a camera. What he found terrified Dolores, because he confirmed the one thing she hadn't believed. I was actually federal, and that's when she lost it. She filed a petition, 67 signatures, called Me a Threat to Family Safety. Accused me of bringing dangerous criminals into the neighborhood. It was projection at its finest, because the real criminal was her, and she knew I was closing in. That's when I got the call from Rodriguez. Marcus, he said, voice tight. The Jeep. She accessed it, took photos of the tech, encrypted systems, classified modules. The blood drained from my face. That Jeep was part of Operation Nightingale, an 18-month wildlife trafficking investigation tracking millions in endangered species through 3 states. Its equipment wasn't just sensitive, it was classified. Dolores hadn't just committed theft anymore. She'd crossed into potential espionage, minimum 20-year sentences. No parole, maximum security prison. And still, she wasn't done. She tried to have me fired, filed official complaints with my agency, accused me of abusing government resources, misusing credentials. She even faked community testimonies, claiming I threatened children at bus stops. But every message, every voicemail, every forged document, all recorded, all admissible, all stacked in the ever-growing case file labeled Crenshaw v. United States of America. Then the vandalism started. Spray. Paint on my door. Federal fascist. Go home, thug. Threatening flyers on windshields. Fake Yelp reviews attacking neighbors who supported me. Doxing single moms. Calling CPS on veterans. She'd become a suburban terrorist in pearls. But I never stopped, documenting. Every move, every lie, every charge. Because I knew the day would come, the day when every resident, every family she threatened, fined, lied to, humiliated, would get to see the truth. And Dolores? She'd be the one in front of the cameras, but not as the neighborhood savior she pretended to be. No, she'd be in handcuffs, and her empire about to fall. Frank's garage smelled like motor oil and revolution. He was 82, a retired military intelligence officer with knees full of shrapnel and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He handed out folding chairs to neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak. But not anymore. 23 families gathered that night. Some brought documents, others brought stories, all brought rage. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Dolores. And the neighborhood she'd turned into a war zone. Tom stood first. Vietnam vet. He shook as he spoke. Not because of fear, because of fury. 20 grand, he said. $20,000 in fake marine violations. She said my fishing boat was a combat watercraft. He held up a bill. red ink, circled around jargon that didn't even make legal sense. The Martinez family followed, a young couple, kids in elementary school. They showed $800 and $900 in emergency repair fines. For what? Gutters that hadn't been touched since Dolores moved in? Then Mrs. Bennett, 84, naturalized U.S. citizen. Her hands trembled as she pulled out one crumpled letter. Unauthorized cultural display, she whispered. My American flag was the wrong size. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thunder waiting to crack open the sky. That night, something shifted. Pinewood Estates wasn't a silent victim anymore. It was an army. And Dolores? She'd just made enemies of everyone she'd ruled. Over. I remember standing beside Janet as she organized the financial evidence like she was preparing a nuclear strike. Her spreadsheets had line items so damning they might as well have been written in blood. Emergency landscaping fees in January? $4,200, she said. Marcus, she billed the HOA to mow snow. Every column was a nail in Dolores's coffin. Rodriguez watched silently, then said, We're not just building a case, we're building a reckoning. And we were, because while Dolores was busy hiring private investigators and vandalizing my door, we were building a war room in my kitchen. Files spread like maps of a battlefield. Evidence, statements, timestamps, financial trails, surveillance. Photos, IRS matches, federal warrants in progress. We even had a name now, the Pinewood Reform Coalition. It started as a whisper, then it became a digital wildfire. Janet launched the Pinewood Truth Facebook group. Within 72 hours, it had 127 members, and more joining by the minute. They shared photos, fines, voice memos, HOA meeting minutes that didn't match reality. Then came the bombshell. Janet leaned across my table one night and slid a manila folder toward me. Marcus, she said, voice shaking. She's been forging board meeting minutes. The words hit harder than a gunshot. Votes that never happened. Documents dated when Harold was in Florida. Pete's signature copied and pasted onto resolutions he'd never seen. Nancy voting. Yes, on things she'd opposed in public. For 8 months, there'd been no board. Just Dolores. Writing fiction. Enforcing it like gospel. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was illegally operated. And her company, Sunshine Property Management, never. Legally registered, no bond, no insurance, no authorization. She was collecting fees from 200 families like a mob boss, charging protection money, while operating with all the legal status of a lemonade stand. That changed everything. This wasn't just a civil war between neighbors anymore. This was a federal war on fraud. Rodriguez got the call from HQ. Keep the operation going. She's crossed into RICO territory. Racketeering. We'd reached the point where mafia prosecution tools became applicable to a woman whose biggest concern used to be mailbox paint shades. That same night, Dolores made her next mistake. She tried to access my Jeep. Again. She didn't. Break in this time. She used Danny's impound lot like her private playground. Security footage showed her photographing my equipment, encrypted radios, tracking arrays, surveillance tools designed for interagency wildlife crime investigations. She wasn't just poking the bear anymore. She was inside the den, swinging a stick. What she photographed wasn't civilian tech, it was federal property. Connected to Operation Nightingale, an 18-month, 3-state sweep targeting wildlife smugglers worth over $50 million if even one component leaked. It could compromise the entire network. And Dolores? She'd documented herself tampering with it on camera. Rodriguez's voice was ice when he called. She just hit espionage exposure. Do you understand what this means? I did. This wasn't just fraud anymore, it was treason adjacent. Meanwhile, the financial web tightened. Janet's forensic dive uncovered $73,000 in fake vendor payments over 2 years, all routed through shell companies controlled by Danny Crenshaw. Landscaping, towing, security evaluations, none of them real. None of them verified. And the best part? She'd been depositing the money. Offshore. Cayman Islands, Switzerland. Accounts under dummy LLCs. All traced, all federal, all felonies. The Department of Justice called the case a textbook HOA criminal enterprise. And Dolores? She still smiled at the community center meetings, still wore that pearl necklace like armor, still parked her BMW like it owned the road. But her eyes had started darting, her hands trembled more often. And when she passed me in the Chow's mailroom, she didn't speak, she just stared. Because now, she knew. Something was coming, and it was bigger than she'd ever imagined. She escalated fast, started sending legal threat letters to anyone who posted in our Facebook group. Neighbors got defamation warnings, contractors got blacklisted for working with troublemakers, single moms received anonymous phone calls, elderly residents found envelopes stuffed with violations for things that didn't exist. Her tactics weren't just harassment anymore. They were psychological warfare. She even tried to get me fired. Called my federal office with evidence that I was a rogue agent using government property for personal use. The calls were recorded, all of them. And every accusation? Another count of obstruction. She posted my apartment address online, claimed I was harboring dangerous materials, claimed Janet was cooking the books, claimed Rodriguez was an imposter. She was unraveling, and the threads were dropping in front of prosecutors like a gift basket from the gods. Then the final blow. Frank's military contact helped trace the private security firm Dolores had hired. Criminal history, illegal surveillance, wiretapping. Charges in Nevada, a firm known for corporate intimidation. She had hired criminals to intimidate a federal agent. Let that sink in. Dolores, who once fined a neighbor for parking a red car instead of a neutral-tone vehicle, had hired a blacklisted firm to stalk her neighborhood and harass law-abiding citizens. The day we confirmed the wiretaps, Rodriguez looked at me and said, "She doesn't need fines. She needs federal custody." And that day was coming fast, because now we had it all. Forged documents, financial embezzlement, wire fraud mail, fraud obstruction, RICO espionage, exposure discrimination, targeting veterans, minorities, and elderly. The DOJ, IRS, FBI, and even the State Attorney General's office were all coordinating, and all waiting for one last move, one final act of desperation. And Dolores? She was already reaching for the matchstick. The first time I saw her cry wasn't in court. It was in aisle 4 of Miller's grocery Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. She wore yesterday's clothes, eyeliner smudged, hair a wild imitation of the precise helmet it used to be. She screamed at a shelf of organic yogurt like it had personally betrayed her. "They're watching me. They're using dairy as tracking devices." The clerk froze. The shoppers stared. And Dolores? She collapsed into a heap of pearls, wine breath, and unraveling paranoia. Someone filmed it. Of course they did. That clip? It went viral before lunchtime. OA. President loses it in dairy aisle. 1.2 million views by dinner. But for me, that wasn't a punchline. It was a signal. She was breaking, and it was time to close the trap. Federal coordination began behind closed doors and encrypted servers. Rodriguez called it Operation Glasshouse, because it was time to throw every stone we had. The list of agencies now involved was longer than most resumes: FBI, Financial Crimes, DOJ, Civil Rights Division, IRS, Criminal Investigations, State Housing, Authority U.S. Marshals Service, Federal Tax Auditors, Homeland Security's Fraud Division. We had enough to bury her, but we wanted it done right. Visible, public, permanent. Because this wasn't just about justice, it was about precedent. Rodriguez and I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by manila folders and cold coffee. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a microphone the size of a paperclip, and handed it to me. "This is your final sting," he said. "We need her voice, not just on fraud, on the civil rights violations, on the intent." I nodded. Dolores was too far gone to resist an audience. She needed someone to blame, and I was always her favorite target. I waited 3 days. Then I approached her. Front lawn. Late afternoon. She was watering her grass with the dead-eyed motion of someone who no longer believed in anything green. "Dolores," I said calmly, "we need to talk." She didn't look surprised, just tired, haggard, hollow. But she nodded and invited me inside. Her living room smelled like lavender and desperation. The same vanilla-scented place where she'd once led PowerPoint inquisitions was now filled with empty wine bottles and legal documents stacked like sandbags. I let the silence hang. Then I asked, why? Her laugh was sharp, bitter, almost amused. Because this neighborhood was falling apart, she said, and no one was doing anything. So you started stealing? I took what I deserved, she spat. I rebuilt this place, I enforced standards. Before me, they left trash cans out, painted shutters the wrong color, immigrants moving. In without any respect for the rules, there it was. The sentence, the one I needed. She kept going. They plant weird flags, have strange parties, walk around like they own the place. But I made sure they understood. I didn't interrupt, because every word was evidence. Veterans? They use their service like a shield. The old ones are easy, they're tired, confused, they don't fight back. And the Hispanics? They don't understand the documents anyway. The paperclip mic recorded it all. Rodriguez later told me, that's the moment we got the life sentence. Because when it comes to federal civil rights violations, you don't need a gun. Just intent. She gave us that on a silver platter. And more. I never meant to tow your Jeep, she added bitterly. Not at first, but you embarrassed me. At the barbecue. Treated me like I was some housewife. I didn't. Correct her. Didn't say a word. Because the trap was closing, and she had no idea the fuse was already lit. 2 days later, Janet called me in a panic. She's liquidating. Marcus, she's trying to withdraw HOA funds under fake emergency bills. Sure enough, 200 families received notices that morning. $1,800 emergency assessment. Infrastructure repairs. The only infrastructure that needed repairing was Dolores's ego. We traced the payment instructions. A shell company registered under a new LLC, one that didn't exist. Until 3 days earlier, the bank flagged it, notified the feds, and that was the final nail. She tried one last Hail Mary, a forged resolution authorizing her to mortgage HOA common areas for a $50,000 legal defense fund. The bank manager, smart enough to have read local headlines, immediately contacted federal agents. The documents were so poorly forged they wouldn't fool a child. And that's when Rodriguez looked at me and said, "We're going in." The night before the takedown, Pinewood was quiet. Too quiet. Neighbors whispered across fences. Lights stayed on a little later. Kids played closer to home because everyone knew something was about to happen. And in the Pinewood Truth Group, comments flew faster than moderators could approve them. I heard she's being arrested. Her brother-in-law's towing business just shut down. The IRS is freezing her assets. All true. Federal warrants had already gone out. The U.S. Marshals had arrival times synchronized down to the second. Rodriguez called it a theatrical operation with legal fireworks. And it needed one final stage. The HOA meeting. She thought it was about my Jeep. She thought she was going to win. Instead, it became the most documented meltdown in HOA history. 200 people packed into the community center. Folding chairs creaked under anticipation. News vans lined the parking lot. Cameras rolled. Phones live-streamed. I arrived in my fully restored Jeep. Government tags gleaming, antennas proud. The very image of everything she tried to erase. Dolores sat at the table like a crumbling queen. Her lawyer beside her looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I stood slowly, held up my badge. My name is Special Agent Marcus Steele, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, assigned to a federal task force investigating international wildlife. Trafficking. Gasps. Audible. Real. And then silence, the kind that weighs on your shoulders. I turned to Dolores. The unauthorized vehicle modifications you targeted were federally installed surveillance equipment. Your tampering compromised active multi-agency investigations. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and then Janet stepped up. PowerPoint in hand, slide after slide showed stolen funds, forged documents, offshore accounts, the boat, the vacations, the BMW lease all paid for with stolen HOA fees, and then, like a scene from a movie, the doors opened, U.S. Marshals entered, badges visible, warrants in hand. Her lawyer stood, hands raised. Don't resist, he whispered to her. But Dolores, she snapped. This is discrimination, she shrieked. He seduced me. He led me on. This is revenge. She pointed at me, then at Janet, then at the crowd. You're all traitors. I built this neighborhood. The handcuffs clicked, cameras flashed, and just like that, her reign was over, as she was led out through a crowd of people she once fined. For Christmas decorations and mailbox paint shades, the applause began, and didn't stop. Not until the doors shut. Not until the echo faded. Not until the tyrant was gone. The handcuffs had barely clicked shut when the applause started. At first, it was a single clap, then another. Then it spread like wildfire through the crowd. Veterans, families, mothers who'd been harassed, elderly neighbors once silenced by fear. The sound roared like thunder through that community center, not because someone was arrested, but because justice finally showed up. Dolores didn't walk out. She was escorted, one U.S. Marshal on each side, her pearl necklace glinting under the fluorescent lights like a trophy of arrogance, the same necklace she wore to every meeting, every confrontation. It wouldn't follow her into federal custody. Inside, the federal vehicle waiting out front, she sat silent, her eyes finally wide with something that looked very much like recognition. For the first time, Dolores understood what she'd unleashed, but it was too late. The dominoes had already fallen, and now came the reckoning. 3 weeks later, Dolores Crenshaw sat in a federal detention center without bail. Flight risk doesn't begin to describe someone with offshore accounts, forged documents, and international wire transfers to untraceable LLCs in the Cayman Islands. She had finally gone too far, and the justice system had no intention of letting her flee from it. The formal charges stacked like a tower of law books. To felony counts wire fraud mail, fraud civil rights, violations, obstruction of federal investigations, espionage, exposure. Theft of government property, conspiracy. Rico Rodriguez described it best. She violated more federal statutes than some organized crime families, and she did it with a clipboard. But the damage wasn't just legal, it was emotional. For 18 months, families in Pinewood Estates lived under manufactured fear. Their homes became war zones, their lives pawns in a tyrant's game. Now, it was time for healing. The very next week, the HOA board held emergency elections, this time with actual democratic process. The results? Unanimous. Maria Santos, the elementary school teacher, President Robert Kim, the local nurse, vice. President Frank, our Vietnam vet, security and infrastructure. Janet, forensic accountant and community hero, treasurer. They walked into the first board meeting with a binder of reforms, smiles of steel, and one shared belief. This would never happen again. Their first act? Cancel all outstanding fines. Their second? Launch an internal audit and publish it online for all 200 families to see. Transparency wasn't a policy. It became law. Then came the restitution. The Department of Justice moved swiftly. Under RICO, victims were entitled to triple damages. Dolores had stolen roughly $126,000 in community funds. The judgment? $380,000 restitution. She'd never financially recover. But the part that really mattered? Families got their money back. Tom, the veteran, used it to fix up his boat, the same one Dolores, labeled a military marine vessel. Mrs. Bennett donated hers to a scholarship fund for immigrants studying American history. The Martinez family finally took their children on the road trip Dolores tried to crush with fake towing threats. And the HOA? They used recovered funds to host a block party. Not just any party. A celebration of survival. And I supplied the barbecue, courtesy of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Community Outreach Division. Frank manned the grill. Janet made spreadsheets for raffle prizes. Maria danced with her toddler on the grass Dolores once ruled like a dictator. For the first time in a long time, Pinewood Estates didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a neighborhood again. Dolores pled guilty. There was no other choice. The evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance tapes, the financial audits, the emails, the recorded confession, especially the part where she bragged about targeting immigrants and confused old people. Rodriguez said the DOJ prosecutors literally clapped when they played the audio in prep hearings. Her plea deal reduced the sentence from 20+ years to 8 years in federal prison. No parole. Her pearl necklace didn't fit the jumpsuit. Her BMW was seized, liquidated to help fund victim compensation. Her fake property management business was dissolved. Her professional licenses revoked across 5 states, and she was banned for life from ever serving on any HOA board or property management company again. But the most powerful outcome? The civil rights lawsuits. 3 separate cases, Mrs. Bennett's flag violation, determined to be ethnic discrimination. The Martinez family's targeting, ruled racially motivated. Tom's harassment, violation of veteran protections. Total settlement. $150,000 across all 3 families. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the ruling. It set precedent. Because for the first time in state history, a homeowners association president was found guilty of civil rights violations under federal law. That ruling changed everything. Word spread, not just through Pinewood, not just through Colorado, but across the country. Local papers picked it up, then state networks, then national news. HOA president faces espionage, fraud charges, federal. Agent takes down suburban crime syndicate when the clipboard went too far within 2 months. HOA reform groups from 17 states contacted us. Rodriguez and I testified before a House subcommittee on homeowner rights protection. They'd never heard a story like it. Pearls, towing scams, forged minutes, money laundering, surveillance, espionage exposure, RICO charges, and it all began because a woman didn't like the look of a Jeep. The committee was stunned, then inspired. The HOA Reform Act of 2025 passed the following year, requiring third-party audits for all associations, state licensing and bonding for property managers, civil rights training for HOA boards, federal oversight mechanisms for violations, and Pinewood estates. It became the model community for the nation. Their story, our story, became the training video for legal defense teams and federal agents dealing with HOA corruption. We hosted visitors from other neighborhoods seeking guidance. Reformists from New Jersey, activists from Texas, journalists from Chicago, all asking the same question. How did you beat her? And the answer? With documentation, with community, and with federal prosecution. Then came the final surprise. 1 year later, a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a letter written in perfect cursive, prison issue paper. No perfume, just ink and regret. It was from Dolores, a full confession. 15. Years of HOA abuse across multiple states. Admitted names of others. Connected managers. Suspicious money trails. She handed the feds a roadmap to dismantle more than a dozen property management rings. Her letter sparked 4 more federal investigations. I read it once, then filed it under Exhibits Past Cases because, for me, the chapter was closed, but the movement? Just beginning. We renamed the community garden, the Marcus Steele Garden for Justice. I didn't ask for it, didn't expect it, but I accepted the plaque with quiet gratitude, because this wasn't just my story anymore, it was all of ours. Neighborhood that stood together when standing up meant risking everything. Veterans, teachers, parents, grandparents, immigrants, all drawn together by injustice and bound forever by what we built in its place, a real community with real rules and real accountability. The plaque was simple, a piece of engraved steel bolted into the redwood frame of the community garden gate. Marcus Steele Garden for Justice, where truth took root. I didn't ask for it, didn't need the attention. But when I stood there, beside Janet with sunlight cutting through the treetops and kids laughing over the first tomato harvest, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not the silence of surveillance or the edge of a stakeout, but peace. Pinewood was healing, and so was I, but outside our neighborhood walls. The storm was just beginning. They say stories die when the cameras stop rolling, not this one. The footage from the HOA meeting, the moment I raised my badge and exposed Dolores in front of 200 neighbors, went viral. Then the arrest footage. Then the community interviews. By week's end, we had over 9.6 million views, and by the end of the month, I got the call. Netflix, Not a joke. Not a rumor. An executive producer called me directly. "Agent Steele," he said, "your story reads like fiction. We want to tell it." I hesitated. Rodriguez didn't. "Do it," he said. "People need to see what tyranny looks like in a neighborhood. This isn't about you. It's about every HOA Karen who thinks power equals immunity." And he was right. So I signed off, on one condition. Real facts, no drama for drama's sake. They agreed, and filming began. Janet was interviewed in front of her spreadsheets. Frank gave his testimony from his garage, framed by medals and memories. Even Mrs. Bennett, 84 years old, voice shaking with dignity, shared her story. "I waited decades to fly that flag," she said. "And I'll be damned if someone like Dolores tells me it's the wrong size." Those words made it into the trailer. So did the moment Dolores screamed at the grocery store yogurt shelf. They called the series The HOA Files, Tyranny in Suburbia. Episode 1 was titled The Jeep That Broke the Kingdom. It hit #1 within 48 hours of release. And then, the phone calls started. Not from press, but from people. A single mother in Utah whose HOA president fined her for having a trampoline, an elderly veteran in Arizona being harassed over his service. Dog's breed. A teacher in Florida who got eviction threats for a non-compliant garden gnome. Stories just like ours, some worse. All real. They didn't want sympathy, they wanted help. And suddenly I realized my job wasn't over. So I stayed in Pinewood, traded my undercover assignments for something else. Something slower, more human. I partnered with Janet and Frank to found a new nonprofit, PACT. Property Accountability and Community Transparency. Offered legal guidance, document analysis, federal reporting channels. Within 6 months, we had chapters in 11 states. People began fighting back. With proof, with paperwork, with the very thing Dolores never thought they'd have, the courage to organize. The HOA horror stories started trending nationwide. And Congress? They were paying attention because nothing moves the legislative needle like viral outrage mixed with airtight case files. Then came the bill. The National HOA Reform Act, drafted with our help. It required mandatory third-party audits every fiscal year, verified board vote logs with GPS-tagged meeting records, civil rights training for board members, a national licensing system for property management firms, federal hotline access for HOA abuse victims oversight. From the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Janet helped draft the financial transparency clauses. Frank rewrote the safety enforcement regulations. And me? I gave the testimony, in front of Congress, under oath, with Dolores's confession transcript in my pocket, and the Netflix producers filming it all behind me. But there was one moment I'll never forget. It came after the cameras turned off, Woman approached me, late 30s, nervous, holding her phone like a lifeline. "Are you Agent Steele?" "Yes." She opened her gallery and showed me a photo of her 7-year-old son in front of a sign. No wheelchair ramps allowed without visual. Pre-approval. Tears welled in her eyes. "Can you help me fight them?" I looked at the picture again, then looked her in the eye. "Yes," I said. "We can." And that was it. That's when I realized I'd crossed a line, from agent to advocate, Janet. And I grew closer, quietly. No drama, no sudden fireworks, just coffee on Sunday mornings and spreadsheets on Tuesday nights. She had a way of making numbers feel like armor, and I had a way of making silence feel safe. We built something, not fast but steady. She used to say, "Justice tastes better when it's served with roasted vegetables." She wasn't wrong. We hosted dinner nights, invited neighbors who once hid behind curtains, and together, we helped Pinewood become something new. A community that listened, a neighborhood that learned. On the 1-year anniversary of Dolores's arrest, we hosted something different, HOA Accountability Day, workshops on homeowner rights, lectures on civil liberties, a documentary screening at the rec center. Even Frank gave a speech. "I've seen war," he said. "I've seen dictators fall. But what we did here? This was something special. This was democracy. One subpoena at a time." He got a standing ovation, Deserved every second of it. That same month, the Department of Justice released new guidelines detecting fraud in residential property management. Guess which case they cited? Ours. The Steele v. Crenshaw case became the gold standard in federal prosecution for HOA abuse. Law schools taught it. Federal training academies dissected it. Real estate firms revised policies because of it. And as for Dolores, she sat in a federal facility in Arizona, serving out her sentence. 8 years. No bail, no pearls, no power. Just silence, and a view of a fence she couldn't control. One final moment stuck with me. A letter. Arrived in plain packaging. Return address. Redacted. Inside, a typed note. Terse, clinical, but real. I thought I was protecting something. I now know I was destroying it. I'm sorry. Tell them I'm sorry. DK. I didn't know if it was sincere. Didn't really matter. Some stones, once thrown, can't be unthrown. But we kept the letter, framed it in the Pinewood Community Center, right next to the bylaws, newly rewritten, legally compliant and transparent. As glass, the plaque reads, "Let this serve as a reminder. Never mistake fear for order, and never forget that neighbors are not enemies, unless you make them so." They called it the Pinewood Effect. Lawyers, journalists, senators, that's what they named the wave, because what started as a stolen Jeep became a nationwide revolution. It didn't happen overnight. It started with one mother in Michigan standing up at her HOA meeting, quoting our case by name. She was fined $900 for letting her son draw chalk art on the driveway, but she fought back and won. Then came the retired mechanic in Nevada, fined for having a restored vintage truck in his driveway. He cited federal protections and filed his first ever civil rights complaint. By himself, he won too. Then came the news specials. HOA tyranny. Is your neighborhood next? Pearls and power. The real story behind Dolores Crenshaw. A week later, the Attorney General's office confirmed it. HOA fraud tips tripled in 6 states. The movement was no longer local. It was national. People weren't whispering about HOA abuse anymore. They were documenting it, exposing it, taking it to court. They came armed with spreadsheets, time-stamped letters, federal hotline case numbers, and one line that echoed again and again across America: "We're not letting this be another Pinewood." Dolores's case was still unfolding in slow, grinding gears of the justice system, but for once it didn't feel slow. It felt inevitable. The evidence was volcanic. So thorough, so airtight, even her new high-priced legal team, led by a former white-collar prosecutor turned defense shark, couldn't find daylight. Her defense attempted everything: emotional hardship, administrative, confusion, mental health mitigation, misunderstood patriotism. But prosecutors didn't blink. Because Dolores hadn't just committed fraud, she had weaponized power. She forged documents, faked votes, created discriminatory systems with the explicit goal of silencing minorities, veterans, elderly, and working families. And worst of all, she did it all while smiling. While wearing pearls, while hosting barbecues and waving flags she didn't believe in. That made her dangerous, because she didn't look like a criminal. She looked like the person people trusted to enforce the rules, and that made her the perfect predator. The courtroom would be her final stage, and this time everyone would be watching. As the trial neared, I began working closely with the Federal Civil Rights Division. They wanted to build new national training materials based on our case. Case law. Precedent. Patterns of abuse. Civil housing codes. They called it the Crenshaw Doctrine. A name she would have loved if it hadn't been attached to her downfall. The packet included 19 red flags for HOA misconduct. Dolores had checked off 17. Her case became mandatory training for state auditors, real estate ethics boards, and property management licensure. Even the IRS got involved, using her financial trails as blueprint examples of tax evasion through homeowner fees. Her empire wasn't just dismantled. It was dissected. Then came the sentencing phase. 8 months after the arrest, a courtroom packed to capacity. The walls buzzed with tension, not fear anymore, but anticipation. Dolores sat at the defendant's table. No pearls, no BMW keys. Just a tan jumpsuit and a public defender after her second attorney withdrew due to ethical incompatibility. Across from her sat Janet, composed in a gray blazer, Frank in his uniform with folded notes in his lap. Mrs. Bennet, clutching a small American flag in her hands, legal-sized. The judge entered, the crowd stood, and the moment began. The prosecutor didn't waste time, her voice cut like glass. Dolores Crenshaw operated a systematic, deliberate, and discriminatory criminal enterprise under the false guise of homeowner protection. Click, a projector lit up the courtroom wall. Slide after slide showed forged documents, fake signatures, towing receipts, foreign wire transfers. Then came the community statements, each one read like a scar. Tom. She fined me $500 for having a service flag. But I served so people like her couldn't become dictators. Mrs. Bennet. She told me my flag wasn't the right shade of blue. I spent 40 years earning my citizenship. She tried to erase that. Janet. I watched her steal from children, from families, from people who were too polite to push back. I did the math. She ran her crimes like a spreadsheet. Then, they called me. I stood up, took the oath, and told the story, not of revenge, but of restoration, not of punishment, but of protection. For those who didn't know how to defend themselves, who didn't even know what laws had been broken until it was too late. Dolores didn't just violate federal law, I said. She violated trust, and she did it while weaponizing structure, procedure, and fear. My final words? They called her mad with power. But that's not accurate. She was sober with power. Cold, calculated, intentional. And that's why it must never happen again. The judge leaned forward and delivered the sentence. 8 years federal time. No parole. $380,000 in restitution. Professional bans for life. Mandatory civil rights education in federal prison. But it was his final statement that echoed through the courtroom like gospel. Power, when unchecked, does not reveal character. It reveals agenda. Ms. Crenshaw used hers to harm. This court now removes it permanently. Gavel, boom, and just like that, it was done. The ghost of her power collapsed like a cardboard castle, and the courtroom stood, not in celebration, but in relief, because justice had finally caught up. The news broke within the hour. Every network, every headline. HOA queen sentenced. Tyranny ends in handcuffs. Federal court ends 18-month HOA crime spree. The Crenshaw case, America's wake-up call. Talk shows booked HOA experts. Online forums exploded, and our PACT inbox hit 12,000 messages in 72 hours. The Pinewood case became shorthand for every abused homeowner who ever received a fine they couldn't fight, from someone they never elected over a rule that didn't make sense. This wasn't a legal story anymore. It was a cultural one, a shift, a reckoning. Back in Pinewood, the community gathered under a tent in the garden. Frank gave a short speech. Janet read the sentencing transcript out loud, word for word, as neighbors listened in respectful silence. Then Maria, the HOA's new president, unveiled a new policy binder, slim.clear.fair. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch, with one sentence printed on the first page, bold and alone. We serve the people, not the other way around. You don't notice the weight until it's gone. For 18 months, Pinewood Estates lived under a shadow no one could name, but everyone felt. That weight, of walking on eggshells, of watching your mailbox like a landmine, of fearing the fine. You couldn't fight. It disappeared. Quietly. Like the moment after a storm when the wind dies and you can finally hear your own heartbeat again. The week after Dolores was sentenced, I walked through the neighborhood just to feel it. No clipboard warriors, no threats taped to trash cans, no mysterious vans stalking driveways, just wind chimes, just porch lights, just peace. But justice? That wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Janet. And I expanded PACT into a national advocacy group. We went from 3 volunteers in a folding chair basement to a national headquarters in Denver with satellite offices in 6 states. We weren't chasing donations. We were building defenders. We launched legal support teams, a hotline for HOA harassment, a database of licensed, audited property managers, school curriculum on civil housing rights, a rapid response unit for HOA overreach victims. Frank joined the board. Maria ran the training programs. And me? I became something I never expected. A mentor. Because there was something powerful about looking into someone's eyes, someone afraid, someone tired, and saying, "I've been where you are, and you can beat this." Then came the call from Washington. I was invited to speak at the signing ceremony for the National HOA Reform Act, now officially law. A crowd of lawmakers gathered under white tents as the President of the United States signed it with 7 pens, each one given to someone who made it happen. They handed me the last one. "Agent Steele," the president said, "you turned a neighborhood nightmare into national change." I smiled, but didn't say much, because the truth was simple. I didn't do it alone. Janet's spreadsheets, Frank's resilience, Mrs. Bennett's quiet dignity, every homeowner who ever whispered, "Enough," they were the reason this bill existed. Was just the megaphone. Months passed. The world moved on. But Pinewood didn't forget. On the 2nd anniversary of the arrest, they held a candlelight vigil. Not for Dolores, but for the idea of never going back. They lit candles for every family who had been wronged, every car towed in darkness, every mailbox photographed, every letter sent in fear. The community garden glowed with soft light as people stood in silence, not mourning, but remembering. Because memory is how you keep the wolves from creeping back in. And then came the final letter. 3. Years into Dolores' sentence, it was shorter than the last. Typed. Neat. Cold. "I have nothing left, but maybe this can help someone else. Do what you want with it." Attached? A list of names, 12 more HOA boards across the country engaged in similar crimes, names, addresses, financial links, off-the-record remarks, board connections. Some were worse than Dolores, some were smarter, all were real. She signed the letter with just her initials. DK. I handed the file to the DOJ and watched the first domino fall. Again. Because even from behind bars, Dolores couldn't escape the power of consequences. And maybe, in her own twisted way, she was trying to make peace. Or maybe she just didn't want to rot alone. Either way, it mattered. Netflix released a follow-up documentary, The Reckoning, 2 years after the Clipboard Queen. It featured interviews from new communities, federal agents, and housing attorneys. But the final scene? It wasn't courtroom drama, it wasn't badges or arrests. It was Frank, sitting on his front porch, drink in hand, smiling as neighborhood kids raced scooters past his house. He said one thing. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes it's just a bunch of tired people who decide they're not scared anymore. That line, it stuck and it stayed. Janet and I eventually moved into a quieter part of the state, still close to Pinewood, but far enough that we could breathe without questions at every grocery trip. We started hosting monthly dinners, not just for friends, but for strangers, neighbors from other towns, organizers from reform groups, federal auditors, journalists, survivors. We called them Guardians' tables because everyone at that table had done something brave, whether it was speaking up at a meeting or testifying in federal court. And over time, that table grew. We built something better than law. We built memory, and memory is what stops tyrants from coming back. The Jeep, still parked in my driveway, still fully restored, still wired from the old sting operation. I never disconnected the surveillance system, call it a souvenir or a warning. I take it out once a month, drive through the mountains, feel the hum of the tires on fresh asphalt, and remember the day I came back to Pinewood to face her. Back when no one thought it would matter, before any Netflix deals, before any reform acts, before the applause and headlines, just me. A Jeep, and a clipboard tyrant, and the belief that someone had to stand up. We received a letter once, from a woman in Georgia. Her HOA tried to evict her for hanging wind chimes. She said she watched our documentary, printed out our case filings, and called every number in our database. Her eviction case was dismissed, She enclosed a photo of her 6-year-old daughter sleeping under the wind chimes. The caption read, "She sleeps through storms now." I showed the letter. "To Janet," she cried, "I did too, because that's why we did it. Not for court wins, not for documentaries, but for peace, the kind you don't have to beg for, the kind you don't lose to a clipboard." On the 5th anniversary of Dolores's arrest, I returned to Pinewood. No press, no banners, just me. The garden had doubled in size. New kids played where the barbecue once caught fire. Veterans planted tomatoes alongside refugees. Teachers and welders swapped stories over compost tips. The neighborhood? Stronger than ever. And on the new mural wall, painted by local students, there was an image, a steel garden gate, an open Jeep, and a clipboard. Shattered on the ground, above it one phrase, "We are our own protectors." I stood there for a while, just breathing, just remembering, because this story didn't end with handcuffs. It ended with community, and began again every time someone whispered, "Not here. Not again." So, if you're watching this and your neighborhood feels colder than it should, if you get letters taped to your door and warnings whispered through fences, if someone tries to use rules like weapons, remember this: truth is quiet but unstoppable. And justice doesn't need a badge. It just needs someone who won't back down. Sometimes that someone is you.